Hey guys, just wanted to hop on for a minute and talk about a little bit with what's going on with President Trump and just kind of the MAGA movement and just kind of, I guess, what some people would call some of the current fractures going on within, America and just kind of with the United States and Israel and Iran. Obviously, we saw Operation Epic Fury. Um, Happened earlier last month, and we've just seen, a lot of back and forth about President Trump's, direction, some of the wording he's used. Um, then the whole rift between, the MAGA movement and the broader Republican Party. It's always kind of been a big tent coalition. When it comes to his base. But we've seen recently, it's kind of created some, like I said earlier, some fractures into what's going on between the Republican Party, and I think we're seeing, almost some divide there, and you know. People want to be 100% for Trump. He can never do anything wrong. And then you have the other side that's like, look, he's just kind of gone off the rails. Polls are showing that the MAGA core is still largely backing Trump, but turnout risk and defections, that kind of that include Joe Kent's resignation and just kind of him going on a lot of these podcasters shows. Um, they've seen a revolt, if you will, and there's some real concerns that have just kind of been heading into the midterms of this year. So just kind of want to talk about that for a minute. Critics on the right call it this mission creep or neoconservative influence. I think defenders call it, necessary strength against the world's, top um, state sponsor of terrorism, Iran. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think we jumped too quickly into trying to say, Trump is absolutely crazy and he's 100% wrong, and I absolutely hate him now and I'm abandoning him. I don't think that's the direction we need to be taking. I also don't think the direction we need to be taking is, I support him 100% and there's absolutely nothing he can do no wrong. And he's just going to save the country and save the world. I don't think we should be putting all our eggs in one basket per se and just depending on one person to um, solve all of the problems. There's only one that I think can truly solve all our problems, and that's Jesus Christ. But we have to look at how it's kind of dividing conservatives and the GOP. The party Trump remade around his personal loyalty, populism, and America First is now split. Between those who are really prioritizing strong military posture and Israel alliance versus those who kind of see endless Middle East entanglements as the opposite of what got Trump elected in the first place. Some of the isolationist voices, especially those online and among young voters that people have called him, feel that war kind of contradicts the core promise to end nation building and focus on our domestic issues here at home. Some of the traditional hawks of that and some establishment Republicans quietly support the action, but this shows up in resignations, especially in the podcast fuels, the CPAC debates, and speculation about the 2026 midterm turnout and what that's going to look like because things feel kind of split. So we have to look at it now. We have to do something quickly. We have to understand that um, the midterm turnout is going to drop, especially among the people who are disillusioned with MAGA and what it's looking like right now. It's not a full civil war yet, but Trump remains kind of the dominant figure, obviously, and the coalition is showing some real strain on what's going on. Some of the viewpoints from some of the podcasters that are really big, some of them I really enjoy, like Sean Ryan. They kind of I've listened to him, and they kind of says he feels betrayed by some of the broken promises and not ending wars and not releasing Epstein files. He obviously had Joe Kent on his show a while back. It's a really good episode if you hadn't seen it. That question whether Trump or Iran is telling the truth on the war and openly said things like every single one of these things is a complete effing lie, about Trump's campaign pledges, and he's also expressed regret kind of over his vote for Trump, and even raised concerns about Trump's mental fitness and his ability to lead the country. He kind of represents that so-called disillusioned veteran voters and MAGA adjacent voices who are pro-Trump, but or who were pro-Trump, but just won't stay silent about it. We've heard some things out of Candace Owens, kind of one of his sharpest critics, I would say. She called him out personally over the war, accused him of prioritizing a wealth over legacy and morality, and suggested that they put Grandpa in a home now. And she's used some strong language about him being like satanic. And Trump obviously fired back on his Truth Social accounts, labeling her as just another nut job, that who's just chasing clicks, chasing publicity. And she has positioned herself as an independent conservative for the longest time. Who's called out obviously some foreign influences and disloyalty, amongst American values and interests. I think one of the bigger names, obviously, being Tucker Carlson, who's also been a longtime ally of Trump, who turned kind of like into a vocal opponent on this issue, and he really argues that the Iran war 100% betrays the America First promises and calls Trump, a slave to Israel and a slave to Netanyahu. And that just goes in a whole nother wormhole. But he also criticizes threats against Iran as vile and religious mockery, if you will, and claims that, Trump's just after empire building. And this is just going to lead to wider conflicts, or even more nuclear risks if we just keep going down this path. And he's done deep dives into Netanyahu. I have too. There's a really good show on, I believe it's Amazon Prime, called The Bibi Files. But the worst trajectory and how it harms U.S. interests is just, you can see it obviously harming the party of the Republicans. And I think, if you want to say it's right versus left, the left is really looking at it right now like, perfect. This is exactly what we want. We want them to be arguing. So come midterms, they're not going to have a base to vote conservative Republicans into office. And guess what? We can put back in people like Kamala Harris, the Joe Biden people from that administration, folks that, if we don't remember back in 2020, were 100% against um Americans. I'll just say it like that. But Trump has attacked Tucker Carlson as low IQ and just publicity seeking, and Tucker has framed it like I like to say is, this is about principles over party and over personality, and we can't just just be so beholden to this one person. And so we'll also talk about Trump's viewpoint on this, especially on Iran. The administration, uh, they claim this as a clear-eyed, decisive leadership on very fixed objectives with Iran, and that's just to obliterate Iran's threats without an open-ended occupation that lasts 20 years, like we saw in Iraq. Now, they point to successes and just kind of how they've degraded Iran's military and their capabilities, and say this isn't a forever war, but it's necessary to protect America and to prevent a nuclear Iran. Um, Trump has used it to justify fast tracking other policies, and warns that critics are kind of weak of an effective pro-Iran having nukes. So he sees it that the MAGA base is still strong. He says that they're still with him, and he dismisses a lot of these podcasters and kind of says they're irrelevant. I don't think we can ignore or deny though that these folks have a huge following, get millions and millions of views, and they helped get him elected at one point, and were probably his best allies in the sphere of media, because the mainstream media, unless you're listening to the White House, you're listening to Fox, all you're going to hear are talking points from Trump that are positive, pro-Trump, pro military action and the things that are going good, with the economy. And I think you have to be objective to this, and you have to look at all sides. You have to listen to the pastors. You have to listen to Trump. You have to listen to Fox. You have to listen to CNN. You have to see what everybody's saying and kind of draw your own conclusions from there. You can't just sit back and say, well, that's what he said, so that's where I'm going. And I've always, that's what I'm going to stick to. And everybody's wrong. Like, I've been there. I've in the past, my younger days, I would say, you couldn't tell me nothing. I supported this guy, that's what it was, and he couldn't do no wrong, and everybody else was just wrong and stupid. I understand that, but we have to back up a little bit before we just completely abandon our president and split our party and put us back to a time when locking down churches and deciding who is essential and making mask mandates and vaccines mandatory. Is that what we want, or are we gonna like get over ourselves and pull it together and say, okay, wait a minute, we have to trust what's going on. I heard this the other day, we just have to trust the process. We've all heard that, but I mean, like, really right now we have to trust the process. We have to pray for our leaders. Looking at what merged Mississippi and what we do and kind of our stance on it, I look at what Charlie Kirk was saying before his passing, and just kind of his stance on Iran, and how he was also an unwavering defender of Trump and just kind of the MAGA doctrine and traditional values and fighting woke culture in America. And that's exactly the kind of loyal, energetic, voice that helped build, his organization Turning Point and help move his work into what inspired us to do what we're doing. So I look at everything, I'm not taking anything for what it is. Our stance on it here at Merge is to present kind of all the viewpoints fairly, whether it's pro-Trump action, anti-war skepticism, isolationist concerns, and everything in between, without picking a team or becoming a cheerleader. We can support the president and the movement's successes without abandoning critical thinking. We cannot do that. We can't abandon our elected leaders, or the voters who put him there, which include Candace Tucker and Sean Ryan's viewing base. But we also can't condone broken promises, unnecessary escalations, or behavior that divides conservatives when unity is needed. It's about truth seeking over tribalism, I believe. We have to be loyal where it counts. We have to be accountable where it doesn't. And that's how we stay honest with the audience. You know, it's super important to look at Netanyahu and Israel's role in this whole 2026 Iran conflict. He has played a central role in, being proactive for pushing for and aspiring the joint U.S. military campaign against Iran, uh, known as Israel's operation was Operation Roaring Lion, alongside the U.S. in our Operation Epic Fury. But he's had a long viewed position on Iran's nuclear capabilities and their programs and their ballistic missiles and just kind of what they're capable of. And he sees that as an existential threat to Israel. So he's always advocated for, decisive action, potentially including regime change in Iran. And for years he's done that, including in Trump's first term. So we've seen a lot of involvement from Israel and just kind of where their lobbying and their intelligence have been kind of pushing the United States to get involved in that. Netanyahu met with Trump, Mar-a-Lago back in 2025, and in the White House in 2026, and he presented briefings on just Iran's capabilities and argued that diplomacy was failing, and highlighted some of the opportunities like a potential strike on Iran would look like, what it would look like, and how changing some of the leadership would look like. It was I heard that it was kind of a hard sell to framing the conflict as being easy and winnable and quick. But destroying the nuclear sites and nuclear missiles would be one of the quicker things to do. But I think Israel conducted its own strikes and coordinated closely with the United States. A lot sooner than we actually knew of. And the campaign, like I said, targeted these military sites and nuclear facilities, to kind of stop any further escalation in their capabilities. But he's publicly stated that Israel initiated and acted, crediting the alliance for unprecedented U.S. support as a shoulder to shoulder conflict, and that we acted together. And he emphasized that the United States, and the Israel's goals are identical, and we're in full coordination. And if you listen to the narratives from Trump and from Israel, it's kind of like, well, this is my idea. Well, this is my idea, and it's kind of like, well, somebody had to have the idea first. We both didn't just wake up one day and we're like, you know what, we should attack Iran, and we should stop them from becoming a nuclear country. Now, don't get me wrong. Iran's been an issue for a while. They're big on state-sponsored terror. We know about um, how the whole issue with Iran got started, 20 something years ago, and how America got involved to have regime change. It didn't quite go the way it was planned, and that's kind of a lot of part where Iran and that country got radicalized, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion. But nevertheless, how does this tie into the whole MAGA divisions and the podcaster criticisms within the conservative sphere, like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Sean Ryan, Alex Jones, etc.? They argue that Netanyahu kind of exerted outside influence on Trump, pulling the U.S. into this conflict that contradicts America first, obviously, because this is happening overseas, and promises, um, contradicts the avoiding of new wars. They point to the lobbying campaign of AIPAC, um, having such an influence on our congressmen and senators, which 90 something percent take money from. Intelligence presentations and personal rapport between Trump and the Israeli prime minister is evidence that Israel was driving U.S. policy and kind of our decision making behind getting involved in this war. And they even use, language like hammerlocking or mind control, when it came to prioritizing, Israeli interests over American interests. And Trump has pushed back, saying, that these people that claim this kind of thing are low IQ and are pro Iran or opposing the action. And I think that's too much from him as well. I don't, because people ask questions, and because people have claims, and because people want to say, but what about this? You can't just call them stupid, and you can't just say that they are pro, basically Iran or pro terrorism. Um, I think that when things wash out, we want to be on the side of critical thinking and not on the side of I took one side or the other, because there is no one side or the other here. I think we have to stand back. We have to be on the side of America, and we have to be on the side of Christian people and a God fearing nation, that is looking at all the facts, and not rejecting all the narratives, but I always say trust but verify, what's going on before we just jump on the bandwagon and say see you later, because Trump's gonna be gone in a few years, and then we're gonna look around like, well, where are all my friends at? Well, you remember when you were calling me dumb? You remember you were telling me how nothing else nothing Trump did could be wrong, and everything that we did was crazy because we questioned Israel. Well, I think we're going to see a lot more come out of that over the next probably year or so, especially with Israel and Netanyahu and his kind of domestic challenges. He faced I would say, a perfect storm of political, legal, and public pressures, at home in Israel, and that kind of intensified around the time that the U.S. and Israel put the strikes on Iran, and then the fragile ceasefire that we saw that didn't really go anywhere. While the campaign did degrade Iran's capabilities, it hasn't translated into the total victory or regime change narrative that Netanyahu promoted. which left a ton of Israelis fleeing the war, or feeling like the war was um, oversold and just underdelivered. And polls have shown his approval rating fall around 34% from around 40%, which was never high to begin with, because he's not that popular in Israel. I'll say it. With only about 10% viewing the Iran operation as a clear success altogether. So it's if you watch the BB Files, which is an interesting show about how Netanyahu's had some issues in Israel that have kind of led to these ongoing wars as his way of avoiding some of the controversies that he's had, and really from facing trial, because he's kept himself in a position where I have to lead my country through this war, and people feel like they're afraid and they're scared, so they need a leader that's doing something and protecting them. um but they have elections scheduled for late October of 2026. Netanyahu's coalition is kind of projected to fall short of the majority, to the opposition that they might see that is going to run against him. But he's blocked he's blocked his trial that has been supposed to happen through these wars, and he's trailed early in the term and after, especially after their Iran war failed to deliver. Um, so I think that opposition figures like I think his name is Lapid, however you say that, slammed him for the diplomatic failure on his part, and he's under investigation for a lot of things like corruption in Israel that we don't know about. And even the far right coalition partners have just voiced some public criticism about him as well. There's been a lot of ongoing protests. The public is really fatigued over this. There's been multi-week rallies in Israel and Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa. A lot of families have fallen soldiers, hostage relatives. There's all the people that were killed early on in this war. They're all demanding accountability. Some of the earlier elections and resignations of people have also been brought to light. Protesters, in the streets. Ultra orthodox groups have joined over Supreme Court rulings on ending their military service exemptions, which is kind of a pretty big deal, saying like, you're not doing what's good for the country, and we just don't want to be involved in the military anymore, is basically what they're trying to say, because your decisions and the things that you're doing are, um, you're not competent, basically. But reports kind of describe the government's repression of opposition voices amid these demonstrations as just kind of a big slap in the face. Um, it's interesting to kind of see the backlash of this war and some of the home front strain that the Israelis have seen over these missile barrages, the school closures, the shelter life that's been going on over there. But Netanyahu insists that there's more goals to complete. We have to keep the finger on the trigger. We have to, keep at this, and public sentiment just kind of leans towards skepticism of the entire thing. And let's look at how this ties back into the whole MAGA Trump and podcast review idea. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, there's domestic vulnerabilities as a factor in lobbying Trump for the strikes and portraying it as a self-preservation over pure U.S. interest kind of thing. They even argue in this documentary on BB also argues that the war distracted from his legal woes, and polling, as well as contradicting the America First promises that we saw. But the Trump and pro-Israel voices countered, that shared threats justified actions regardless of Netanyahu's personal strikes. But with the backlash, it's continued and contributed to the declining U.S. views of Israel and Netanyahu altogether, especially young Americans and even a lot of Republicans in the party. So it's important to look at all these key pieces, not just listening to one person or listening to a group of podcasters, but I think we have to listen to everybody and look at the substance behind these folks. I don't know that Sean Ryan, Candace Owens, or Tucker Carlson are under any kind of investigation for corruption within their company. Bibi's under investigation for corruption in Israel. Well, some people say, well, Trump's under investigation or has always been, under investigation for some of the things that he's been involved in. Like, okay, so if you want to look at it like that, well, and you're a super hardcore, Trumper, well, what do you do then? Like you say, well, forget about all the corruption stuff. I don't, I don't. Some of it's worth listening to and looking into. Some of it's just not. The stuff that has gone to trial. Trump was obviously exonerated of these things, and nothing came about it because they did look into it. Matter of fact, they're finding that a lot of it was manipulated against him. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he's ill advised. I think losing people like Joe Kent were not good for him or the administration. I don't think he should have gone as crazy on people like Candace and Tucker and Sean Ryan as he did. I don't think that they should have turned around and been like, well, you called me fat, so I'm going to call you ugly type high school arguments that we're seeing with them. Because what is it doing? It's dividing the party. It's dividing people that were once allies and saying we're doing what we're doing to go against, the COVID vaccine, deep state agenda, administration that we previously had together to wait a second, like you know, I don't agree with this war. Well, I agree with my president 100%. Like, well, then we're not for each other. And like I said, then now the other side, if you want to take sides, just like perfect. They hate each other now. Now instead of the husband and the wife going after the enemy together, the husband and the wife are having issues within their own home, and the enemy's just sitting there looking like this is great. Like I have their home fighting each other. I have them tearing each other apart from within so much that it's gonna be able to slip in. So, anyways, that is really all I want to say and all I'm going to say about it. Because I don't know if I feel obligated to talk about this kind of thing. I do feel obligated to talk about this kind of thing because I think there's so many people that have questions about what is right and what is wrong. What side should I be on? Like, you shouldn't be on any side. Like, you should look at everything very objectively and stay calm and not jump to conclusions because you might be looking at the facts in 6 months or a year and be like, oh crap, I was totally wrong. Now I have to retract. Now I have to go back. And I was saying, this person was completely right and they could do no wrong, or these people are not crazy and they're right and he's wrong. Like, don't take that side. Like, we need to sit back for a minute and look at all of the information we have and just pray and just kind of wait. We have to stay involved. We have to stay engaged when it comes to elections. We have to continue to listen to these people that are saying these things because let's face it, I mean, these podcasters have a lot of interesting people that come on and they're having these conversations to get answers to questions, including things like the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which is still sort of a mystery. But who's doing the investigation there? It's not the administration. It's private investigators. That are pushing the narrative, that are getting people's attention, that are forcing these administrations to really take action and look into what's going on. So without people asking questions, we're just going along to get along. That's just not something I agree with. But anyways, what I want to say is that's kind of, we're not going to talk about this a whole lot more. I just wanted to get on and say that, at Merge, Mississippi, it's called Merge Mississippi for a reason. We are going to focus on what's going on here in Mississippi, what's going on here at home. Yeah, we're going to look at some national things, but uh, we're not going to take a stance of this is just, one side versus the other when we're both on the same side, or whenever. We know what's good for us, but we're just so stubborn in our ways that we cannot get over, whether it's what the podcasters are saying or whether what it's the president saying. Like, I don't think that is smart. I think that we have to look at and most of the conservative base, is very much for, you know, looking into these things and diluting the corruption and fighting the deep state and God forbid not going back to any kind of administration that forces vaccines or lockdowns or any kind of crazy things that you've seen, whether it's not releasing things like the Epstein files. Like we know what's right and wrong. Like why are we arguing within ourselves of where we stand, whether if you're against President Trump, you're wrong and you're stupid, or if you're for President Trump, you're crazy and deranged and you don't, you're not America first. Like we're all saying the same things. We're just saying it in different ways, and it's making it sound stupid, for lack of a better word. But, Mississippi and the Conservative Coalition of Mississippi and Emerge Mississippi are focused on Mississippi politics, Mississippi elections, Mississippi policy, the people that are running for office here in Mississippi. We have a great show lined up for you next. We'll get into that soon, but I just wanted to hop on and talk about that for a minute to kind of let y'all know where we stand on some of these issues because we're focused on what's going on here in Mississippi and how we can help our communities, help our state, stay engaged, stay active, and be informed about what's going on, not just on the national level, but we're going to talk about that some so you guys understand, like, here are the facts, here's this, here's that, make up your own mind, but don't just jump on a wagon because you think you have to pick a side. Like you don't have to pick a side. There's a right and a wrong. Now, those are the only sides you should be looking at. But when it comes to the party within, whether it's for Trump or against Trump or for the podcasters in the war or against it, like, don't just pick a side just yet. Go with your gut, look at the facts, look at all the opinions out there, look at the information, and then you can kind of assess for yourself, like, okay, where do I feel and where do I stand on this? And your gut's usually right. And I think more people are starting to come out to kind of expose some of the truth, and I hope and I pray that we can stay, um, active in coming together as a country, as Christ's body, and praying for our president, praying for our elected leaders, praying for each other, and acknowledging that this too shall pass, and we don't want to be sitting on the wrong side of history, saying that you know, I know we always want to say, well, I want to sit back and say, I told you so. Like, we shouldn't want that for each other. We should want to say, how can we help each other? And what can we do to keep advancing, um, not just our country, but our state to leave it a better place than we found it. So, thanks.